All right, we are live. And I want to thank everyone who is here, who will be signing in, who also be joining us later for the replay. I am Dr. Dooley. I'm a board certified psychiatrist practicing in Georgia. And my platform is mental health and more. So I talk about mental health topics. A passion of mine is decreasing stigma around mental health issues. And I'm so really glad and privileged this evening to have Olympia Atkinson with me. She is the producer and the main star of Olympia Documentary, which really chronicles her experience with bipolar disorder. And again, I want to thank you for your willingness to be here to share your experiences with us this evening. So I guess we'll start by if you could just give us a brief introduction about yourself and really just let us know, what motivated you to, your willingness to make this documentary.
Well, Dr. Dooley, thank you for having me. My name is Olympia J. Atkinson, and I'm a veteran. I'm a mom of two. I have my 21-year-old son, Jordan, and my 15-year-old daughter, Taylor. I am a comedian, dancer, and writer, and now I'm adding documentary producer to that arena. And I am a person living with bipolar disorder. I was diagnosed in 2017, and some of the experiences that I had after experiencing a psychotic break, I took those experiences and I made a documentary about what happened during that time. And I just felt it was important to share what happened to my family because it wasn't just myself that went through this, hardship. It was my family, my friends. And so that's pretty much the scenario of the documentary.
And for anybody who might be watching, I know you use that term psychotic break. And I guess from a medical perspective, that would be a time where a person would have, just literally a break with reality. They may be having what we call like a perceptual disturbance. That means any change with one of their five senses, seeing, hearing, any five senses that they could be having an experience that might not be, reality based. So hearing things, seeing things, feeling things, or people can have paranoid thoughts that might not be based in reality. So I guess that's how we would describe it from a book definition. So I guess in your own words, for people who are watching, how would you describe it when you say psychotic break? Like, how would you describe what that was?
Well, I can remember really feeling like I was floating. And when you really think about floating, you know, you really don't feel anything. You're just moving in space and time. And I really didn't know what was happening around me. I really had lost, control over my thinking. Um, I really, you know, um, can't remember every single detail, but in the documentary, I remember I covered as much as I could remember because I couldn't remember everything that happened because I was, unclear.
So I just wanted to see, and again, we one of the things we talked about beforehand is we don't want to talk about too many details because we do want to encourage people to actually watch the documentary. But I know that we'll because you are so well educated about the illness, we might use medical terms, just during this conversation. So we'll try our best when we do that to try to be sure that the audience can know, because I know that you know and we know what they both are, but just in case someone's watching who might not know. I think one thing that I appreciated about your willingness to share what the experience is that particularly when it comes to having psychosis, when we see it like portrayed in movies, at least in my experience, is usually something that is it's just very sensationalized. And I find that it's usually something that's not just, and maybe it's because it's for the movie and they have to make it seem like it's something that is that way. But I think that's one thing I appreciate about your experience, because I think just your friends and family too, like their experience of it. Because I think people think it's going to be something huge and you're going to just like really notice it, but sometimes it's something just very subtle and people might not really notice it so like obviously until maybe there's a major problem. And I think in your case that was kind of what happened as well. And again, I think your friends and family kind of talk about their experience with that. So I was very appreciative, because in my work, that's often how it really does present. It's not like you're just here one day and then boom, there's this huge change. It can be very subtle until it's not. So I think that your story really kind of followed that in a lot of ways. um did you have any like hesitation or concern about, being so um forthcoming and so vulnerable, and just so specific in sharing the details about your story? Did you have any concerns about it? Because we both know there's a lot of stigma around mental illness, particularly having a serious mental illness.
Sure, I did. I was nervous to talk about every single detail of my life because we all know that when it comes to um, being or having or being diagnosed with a mental illness, it takes certain things in your life that fall apart, that disappoint you, that really disrupt your peace, as they say, and then it causes the breakdown. So I guess what I'm saying is I was I was thinking about, you know, oh, someone's going to, you know, judge me, or someone's going to, maybe stereotype me or something like that at first. But then I prayed about it because, I'm a strong believer in God, and I just let it go.
And I think, after I watched your story, I wrote you and I wrote a review about it. And one of the things that I even mentioned in that review is that I think is so powerful about the story and that will be so helpful, particularly for people in the Black community, is that you do talk openly about your faith. And but you talk, and you also talk openly about, receiving mental health treatment, medication, and psychotherapy. And so often in my experience in Black community, particularly, people often don't think those two things can exist together, that you can be a spiritual person, that you can be a Christian. I'm going to be just very specific, that you can be a Christian who also takes medication for mental health and talks to a therapist. It's not like a Christian counselor, that you can do both, that you can exist there. So I guess, did you ever have any conflict with that? Or, I guess in the church, I definitely grew up in the church where they would say, like, if you don't have enough faith that God can change it, then like it's something wrong with you, I mean, that was kind of a message that I was kind of hammered in my mind. They didn't necessarily say don't get mental health treatment, but those little kind of insidious, those preach those messages, and it kind of
Mhm.
gets into you. I guess, did you ever get that, or did you ever have any conflict with like the teachings that you had and like receiving mental health treatment?
Well, that's a really good question. Um, I believe that from a young girl, my mother raised me to listen to your doctor.
Okay.
And I know that sounds funny, but I believe that a doctor's opinion, it's important, and it actually, it you know eliminates religion and spirituality all of that for me, it it doesn't matter. What matters is listening to your doctor. And so I just thought, you know, I'm going to get medication, I'm going to go to therapy, and I know that God will still, you know, be present in my life.
Okay. That's great, and I really hope that, people who listen to this, and on the replay that they can receive that message as well, because almost, I would say every week I have that discussion with people who are really struggling, who feel like they're sneaking to get their mental health treatment, or sneaking, taking medication because the kind of, the vein of faith that they're in is not as supportive, or their family is not as supportive of them receiving mental health treatment. So, um, now I think the other kind of culture that you belong to, that I'm very familiar with, for the people who follow me, they know that I've worked in the VA hospital system. This is my 10th year. So, we know that military culture and veteran culture is also not often support. Well, I'm not gonna say veteran culture because veteran is once you get out. So I think in the veteran culture we are very supportive of people getting mental health treatment. But I think sometimes on active duty service it may not be the same because there are security clearances and just the culture of you got to stay tough and we're gonna fight through it, and if you over in medical and all the time it can be seen as a negative. So I
Mhm.
definitely in active duty culture there is some um hesitation that people have about seeking kind of mental health treatment, and that kind of can foray when they get to the veteran side of hesitation to seek mental health treatment. So I guess, do you feel like when you, from your kind of the military culture side, did you get any, I guess, negative messages or kind of discouragement about seeking mental health treatment? And if you did, like, how did you overcome that?
Mm, well, I was diagnosed later in my life, so I wasn't, you know, serving in the military when, you know, I started receiving treatment. Um, but I feel like, you know, yes, the military, just that whole experience, you know, it, well, I'm saying we were told to be strong.
Right.
And, when you think about any type of illness, you think of, oh, you have to surrender to being weak, you know, in order to recover, in order to, feel better, in order to, you know, uh, get help, that's weakness, you know. But I feel like this. I feel like I've been strong my whole life. I'm a single mom. I've raised my son to be 21. I'm a badass. And, I could care less, about what anyone really thinks at this point. It's about what's best for me and what's best for my family.
Right. Right, and I think, and I would imagine that probably because, you are a veteran, even though you weren't diagnosed, I'm sure veterans probably approach you just because, the camaraderie and, that, particularly I think amongst, women veterans because the numbers are increasing, and, at least in my experience, as long as I've been in, more and more women are getting their treatment, like, inside the system, that just some of those that culture just can kind of persist. So I think it still helps, every identity that you belong to, that you're saying, "I am this, and I am also getting my treatment." To me, it is a win. For
Right.
you to say, "I'm a veteran," whether or not you got your treatment in there, and you say you're getting treatment, to me, it is a win because then people are still able to identify with that. And so it's a net positive. Um, I think one other thing that stood out to me, from the documentary is you talked about your time in mental health facilities and, for what and because you're a person who's, like, into media and a comedian, so I'm sure that you've seen a lot of depictions of mental health facilities kind of in media, movies. I know One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is a very famous, depiction of that. Girl Interrupted is a very kind of famous, depiction of, like, kind of experiences in a mental health facility, and they're often not positive. particularly older depictions. Unfortunately, a lot of that's true, how people were treated, and I think, as being part of, even though I wasn't around back in those times, just being part of the mental health kind of complex, we have to acknowledge that some of the ways people were treated now and back then particularly, but also now, just weren't good conditions, and that people were not treated right. People didn't have good oversight, just acknowledging that.
Mhm.
Um, and I really loved how you talked about, like, ways that we can make it, like, more therapeutic, make it a place where people can heal, because that's what they're supposed to be there for. They're supposed to be in there getting better. And for people who don't know, because I know everyone doesn't understand how mental health hospitals work when you're an inpatient. So for those of you who are watching who don't understand, when you go to a mental health facility, whether you're there voluntarily or involuntarily, you're locked in there. So you're not just able to come and go like you can on a unit, like if you went and had your appendix out. You're locked on there for the time that you're receiving treatment. You may have a pass, depending on the nature of different hospitals, but you're locked there. You're staying there. And so I guess, what would you say to, like, the profession? And I know, you may be doing some work with this just kind of within the state of Arkansas, but what would you say about ways that we can make it more therapeutic? Because I definitely think from the provider side, we have thoughts in our mind about how we can. I sit in meetings where people talk about this, but I would really like to hear from your perspective, like, what you think would be helpful. Because I don't know if, like, what we think would be helpful is what, a person who's actually experienced it think would be helpful.
Well, the first thing is, I believe that the patient's hair, gets a little messed up, and um, that goes for men and women. And so, you know, something that I know that makes me feel better is when I get my hair done. And I was just thinking that they could bring in hairstylists and barbers that could do the patient's hair. And I know that's a small thing, but really, in terms of wellness, that's a huge thing. And then I thought the clothes that they wear, it looks like at one of the facilities I went to, we wore scrubs, and I just thought, why not have these companies, donate clothing to different mental health facilities, and then the patient can pick out what they want to wear, and it's something comfortable, but it's not just this plain, you know, scrub that they wear. Um, and then another thing I thought, to make it more vibrant and fun is, they would have movie nights where the patients can watch movies together, and maybe there's a popcorn machine and everyone gets a bag of popcorn. Um, and then, I'm a teacher as well, so I get all of these ideas from working with kids. But also chili nights where homemade chili is made and everybody gets a bowl, and you know, then pizza nights. Different activities besides the classes that they offer, because the classes are great. Don't get me wrong. And they talk about self care and just music therapy and things like that. But I just felt like, in addition to, I think those things would be helpful in patients' recovery.
And I think that no, I honestly think those are great ideas, and um, I think that I think being in the VA where we have, not all, because I know that, we have short staff just like every other place, but, oftentimes we do have access to have a recreation therapist on our units who literally do some of those activities that you're describing. But what I think would take some creativity around and some extra work, but it could definitely be done, would be around, like, the clothing, because, part of the reason that the scrubs are there, I mean, it's easy, right?
Mhm.
But just for safety risk, right? We know that people do elope sometimes off of lock units, and sometimes when they have street clothes, it makes it easier to happen. So some of that's because it's easy to identify who belongs there and who doesn't. But I don't think that that should be the only reason, right? Because scrubs aren't comfortable, and there's other reasons. Being ladies and things that we have going on, sometimes wearing scrubs things can you can see things easily. I mean, there's other reasons that I've heard that before. So the fact that like you're bringing that up, like I think it's a real issue that I think it can be problem solved around. So I think that that's an important issue. And the hair. I mean, just from a cultural competence standpoint, I think that that is, like, necessary, and and again, I know that safety first, of course, and one of the main reasons we don't have certain styling tools on the units is for safety, right? Because we know people may harm themselves or someone else, but again, I don't think that it has to be no, you know what I'm saying? Like, because everyone isn't at that same level of risk, right? And so I think that something could happen, with that. And so, again, I think that, um, and I know you're going to be doing like advocacy in some of your work. I really hope from a particularly cultural competence standpoint, because we know that when if you have 4C, if your hair is anywhere in the four lane, if it goes and it is unkempt for so long, locks will start forming. Like
Right,
we're
right,
gonna have a hair issue that we gonna is not gonna be reversible at a certain
right.
point. And I have seen that, and it really does affect people's self-image. And as particularly where I used to work here in Atlanta, where we did deal with a lot of people who are homeless and transient, as they're trying to get better, you want to look just like everybody else here on the unit. I don't necessarily want to look maybe like I'm coming from my circumstances. And when my hair is like disheveled or is that unkempt or overgrown or my beard, or something like that. It just looks like that. And it doesn't look like what I'm trying to do, like I'm trying to heal. So I think that is actually a great I think that's a really great suggestion. And I think just like from the provider side, and then also I think from like an advocacy side, I think that's something that could be worked on. I don't think it has to be like 100% no. Does it have to be no sometimes? Maybe if there's a safety risk, but I don't think it has to be 100% no. You know what I'm saying? I think that that could be worked. That
Well,
that could be
I
worked
also
through. So
think that, you have these hairstylists that are looking for work, you know, and why not make it like this movement where, one of the job descriptions or job responsibilities is there's a stylist on staff, you know?
I'm sorry, we did have a little bit of a technical difficulty during the live stream, so I did have to cut out part of this part of the conversation. So it does jump a little bit, but hopefully you don't miss too much of the conversation. We love the therapist who was, and I kind of wrote that in my review,
Mhm.
who was in the documentary. And one thing she said that really stood out, she said a lot of really great points, but one thing she said that stood out to me also was that sometimes people do not return back to their baseline. And when that happens, sometimes people have to kind of learn and process like to a new trajectory. Like they're not going to return back to that. And that really stuck with me because I find that to be true. And when it does, it can be just really heartbreaking for people sometimes because sometimes people want to go back to their old life and the old way of functioning. And even if they can go on and have a life that's full and it can be a great life, it still may not be what they hoped it would be before they had their illness or had their break. And so I guess I wanted to ask, do you feel like you went back to your baseline, before you kind of had your kind of first breaks? And if you didn't, I guess how do you feel about the new trajectory, that you're on?
Well, one thing that did change after I had my psychotic break was my speech.
Okay.
And I was just having a conversation about this the other day with my best friend. And I said, I don't speak the same way. And, it doesn't bother me, but I have a background in communication. Like my bachelor's degree is in communication. So, I just told her that maybe she actually recommended that I maybe take some speaking classes.
Okay. Like, how is it different? Do you mean just like the tone or delivery is different, or like how is it different?
Well, just me being able to uh, form, you know, sentences,
Oh,
and to be able to basically, speak quickly, and sharp. I'm pretty sure you're thinking my speech is okay, but I'm saying before I was a little more like I was smoother, and things were, a little easier for me. Now I feel like, it's, a little struggle, but that's okay. And I'm just really optimistic, Dr. Dooley. I've been through so much in my life that every day now is a blessing. And I just thank God that I'm still here, that my kids are doing great, my family, they're all doing great. I have nothing but gratitude.
okay. And, because I know that, that you're a teacher, you talked about that, in your doc, but I mean, just in your introduction also. So I guess that was the trajectory you were going on before as far as, like, your education and your career path?
Yes.
Okay,
And actually I am going to complete my master's actually before the timeline that I gave in the documentary. I might be finished next summer, and then I plan to start my PhD in education, and I would like to be a professor.
okay. So in terms of, like, your career, your education, it didn't really impact that in any way?
Sure, yes, yes, it did because um, I felt like at first, honestly, I felt like I knew a lot back then, but then after my break, I had to kind of relearn some things. I had to study. I had to, you know, um, learn how to um, just pick myself up and be outgoing and have a lot of energy again, because at first I didn't have a lot of energy after I had my psychotic break. So I had to put some work in there, to improve myself and to get to where I am today.
Okay, okay. But I think, and again, I think also you're a great example of how someone can still, because again, I think people have like misconceptions in their mind of like, well, if you've been like admitted to a psychiatric hospital, mental health hospital, that you wouldn't still be out like living your life and teaching, having a professional career. Like I think people in their mind have a vision of like what that looks like and then what you could be doing. They don't realize like a professional person, a person who you work with, could have had like those kind of symptoms and they could still get out and still be like successful. I think you're a good example to really break that stigma and break that stereotype. So people, yeah, just it could be anybody, it doesn't mean that you can't get out and still have a career and earn a PhD and, do all these wonderful things. So, um, and then, again, I think one of the other great things about the documentary is, the information from your friends and your family, and, them kind of describing their experiences. Because, like you said, it affects you, but it affects, your friends and, your family, and again, having done this work for a while and, had, so many experiences with family members, I will tell you that so often especially when they're going through, multiple hospitalizations and everything, families get burned out, and I think the fact that your family has really like stuck with you and been supportive, and really, especially your sister, really, I saw it and she like try to understand too, like really trying to make sense of it because some family members just cannot, they don't do that. They don't get it and they don't try to get it. You know what I'm saying? They just like they stop. And I think that really causes it can really cause rifts in families and breaks in families, not because they don't love each other, but just because some people can't take like that extra step to get understanding. And definitely your the people who you had in your documentary really did that, not just support you, but really like take the extra step to like try to get some education and some understanding to help you.
So my mom is sitting here during
Oh, okay.
the show, and she wanted to actually jump on and tell you her experience. Is that okay?
Sure.
Um,
If,
she
if it's
wanted
okay, if it's okay with you.
she wanted to talk about just what she did in order to, I guess, help my sister, my brother, get on board with, my diagnosis.
Sure.
So
Hi.
I'm Laura Shirley, and I like talking about this. I like Olympia, and I appreciate you for getting involved with this because there's a lot of work to be done um, regarding mental illness, and I think we're just now beginning to really normalize or make people realize the extent that it is. Um, I guess the first thing I would say is that when I heard her say that, when I heard you ask that question, I immediately thought, wow, there was a lot of work done in the background. Um, One of the things that I've always told Olympia was that she was not able to see herself. So I had to see things as they were. I had to see her mental illness. I had to see what was happening from day to day and monitor and watch. And one of the things that did happen early on is I started to realize something subtly was happening to her. Some patterns were being developed to the point that they just weren't real, and I had to think this is not real. Something is happening to her, and as we got closer and closer to it, there were comments in the family, especially the sister and the brother, my other two children, they would say things and say, "Oh, that's Olympia. That's how she acts that way. She likes attention. She's just trying to get attention. That's who she is. That's you know." And I really had to make sure that they knew that this was not the case, and that we had to talk about what was really, really happening, and what it meant was that she just was not at herself, and that no one would wake up and act, you know, and do some of the things that she was doing without having a problem. In other words, there is a problem. So I did a lot of work with her children um, from the beginning. And not long after, we started having to go to the hospital and stuff, and situations would come up where she would get lost and we'd have to go find her. Um, Things like that were happening. And we just communicated all the time. I would tell them the truth. I would talk to them and say things to help them understand, to give her space and time and watch her, and don't keep any secrets. Don't, I think my grandson, my daughter took him to the airport during one of her delusions, and he spent 2 or 3 hours at the airport with her. He came back to the house and he did not tell me that he had gone and spent that time. But when I spoke with him finally about it, he said, "I wish I had told you." I said, "You're going to have to tell me. It's not like you're betraying your mother, or you're, not letting her be an adult or whatever." I said, she doesn't know what she's doing. So I'll say it like that. There was a lot of experiential um, times when I had to just instinctively just get in there and say, "Hey, this is what's happening to your mother. This is what's happening to your sister." And so there was a lot of that instinctively going on. And just having that second sense that we had to correct and try to get better, and that there could be a solution to this. But I'm going to stop and kind of
Okay.
let y'all get back on track.
I think that, one of the vital things, Mom, that I take away from that is that, we cannot deal with something if we are pretending like it's not there, if we're acting
Yes.
like it's not, we're trying to keep it quiet. And it's like, we can have conversations about what's going on in a respectful way, but we have to confront it. We can't just keep pretending like nothing's changed. And that kind of actually brings me to my next question. And since Mom is there, she may have some insight to this. But you kind of described in the documentary that there were just certain times like things were happening and like you didn't remember, or you just didn't have insight. Like you were doing things or you had beliefs, but you really thought they were true. You didn't have insight to like what was going on. And one thing I will say from the documentary that I think a friend kind of mentioned, she described as like talking to you and saying, kind of trying to convince you, I think, to kind of leave a location that you were at, and people thought that you were really listening to her. Like there was something about your relationship with her that you would listen to what she said and like believe her. And so I guess, what would you say? Because I know that that's like a common thing. I'll have patients, particularly people who I know very well and I've developed a relationship with them. When I start to notice that something goes, I could just tell like that things are changing, that they'll be willing to listen to me, that when they're telling me their story or their idea or what the trip they're about to take, and I just know that's not them, they'll be willing to listen. But otherwise they'll just think that this is like a great, they don't have insight. So for people who are watching, I think that's something that is important to know, that when these changes start happening to people's moods, and these beliefs start changing, a lot of times the person themselves doesn't have the belief or the insight that this doesn't make sense for them, that it's not something they would typically do. They at the time, in that moment, it seems like a totally perfectly reasonable thing to do. Even to the person listening, it doesn't seem reasonable. So I guess, what would you say during those times? Like, is there something else that people can do, your doctor or anyone else, like that we could do to, like, during those times, to like make it kind of sink in, that or is it just kind of depends on how things go, to kind of, as far as developing insight? Because what I found is the more like stronger relationship I have with people, that's the more likely chance they'll listen to me. Just the longer we've been working together really is the only thing that I found really kind of makes the difference. I guess in your case, do you feel like is there something else, like, as the doctors and therapists can do, or as family can do, like during those times when we notice a change, to kind of help you recognize that it's like not you in those moments?
Well, I think it depends because I know there were points where I really wouldn't be able to uh, connect with my doctor or my family. I was just out of it, just checked out completely. And so there may be, if there's someone who has a loved one out there, and they're dealing with mental health challenges, there may be some times where you just won't get through to that person. You're just going to have to be patient and wait until the time presents itself where they're more clear. And that may happen after they, you know, take medication or, go through therapy. It may take some time, and another I said depends because um, you could also have you could have a moment where you you fully understand, what's going on and who you're talking to, where you're at. um like the time when I was talking to my best friend, you know and I was in Los Angeles at a mental health facility, and she started talking about my daughter needed me, and she told me that I needed to come home because my daughter needed me. And that just, woke me up. I Something just snapped, like, she's right. And it's just like you said, it's the relationship, the person that you're talking to that can get you to kind of come back. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Mhm. Okay. That's helpful, because I think sometimes, I think as providers or even like as family members, they struggle because people are like, what is the other thing I can do? And I think sometimes we have to accept that we may be powerless over what is happening. We may have done all we can do, and we just have to kind of like stand by until the person is receptive to it, and when they're receptive, it's like we're ready. As painful as it might be or as hard as it might be, I think sometimes I definitely know for myself, 12 years into being a psychiatrist, I have accepted my powerlessness. I know that I am not controlling what people are doing, but I know for families and friends it can be really hard to
Yeah.
do that. So thank you for sharing that, because I think people need to hear that. Families and friends who are watching, I think, really need to hear that. And I guess I'll just finish up with my last question, and it's about medication. So I do think that like stigma around mental health, particularly counseling and therapy, I feel like that is definitely getting better. Particularly in Black and Brown communities, I hear people talking about going to therapy, accepting therapy, but medication, people still, I don't know, they still they still ain't always so sure about that. And again, I know the history of psychiatry, how medications have been used. There's some ugliness to it. And again, I like to acknowledge that. We know, as particularly Black folks in this country, our history with the medical complex, it hasn't always been good, and so I understand the fear of just medicine in general, the healthcare system in general, but particularly around psychiatric medicine. So I'm going to tell you some of the more common like worries that people tell me. So people tell me they worry about, the number one is that I don't want to be a zombie. Which I usually equate to people feeling like I don't want to be sedated. I don't want to be walking around drooling or sedated. Again, I think a lot of that comes from TV. They feel like they see that, and they think that's going to happen. The second thing I hear is that people feel like they're going to be changed. They're going to like become a different person, like the medicine. And then the third is that people feel like literally like I'm going to be mind controlling them. Like some kind of way I'm going to like give them something and then I'm going to be like using it to like make them do things I want them to do. And I think when people are telling me that, those are really like three realistic fears. I don't think that they're kidding. I think that they're legitimately worried about that. So, I guess did you have any of those fears or any other fears about medicine? I mean, it is realistic. I know, particularly mental health meds. Sometimes they do cause people to be sleepy. I mean, I know that's realistic. Sometimes they definitely can cause weight gain. I mean, I don't even think that's a fear. That's just an actual side effect that can happen, pretty often. Being sleepy and weight gain, those are definitely realistic. I guess, did you have any of those fears? And if so, I guess, how did you combat like the worry about it? And again, I think anyone listening, since those are such common ones, I think would appreciate, what you have to say about that.
Well, yes. I do believe that your background and your influences will determine whether you take medication or not. Because some people don't even get shots for their kids, because they're so afraid of medication, and that's their choice. But my choice has always been to follow the doctor's orders, and if there's medication that can help you know solve the problem, then you take that medication. And that's how I grew up.
Okay.
And I think also, yes, um I did experience drowsiness, and I was sleepy when I first started taking the medication, and it really knocked me out, because it was something that I'd never, done before. And so, I had to go through that process. But like I said, I didn't have a lot of energy, and I had to fight my way back to, doing different activities to to be more alert, to be more, uh, I guess, alive, you know. And so it does take work, With the medication, you have to do some things, within yourself. If you want to be well again and you really, are committed to wellness. And then, yes, to weight gain. I did gain weight after I took medication. Um, and, some people will probably think, you know, I'm not taking that medication because I don't want to gain weight. Well, I knew I was going to gain weight and I took the medication anyway because I want to be better. I wanted wellness. I wanted everything that came with being the best Olympia I could be. So it did not matter that I gained weight, you know. And I know some people, like I said, they won't like that part of it, but it's a choice. And another thing is, it's just like with birth control. They say that you gain weight if you take birth control. Some people may think, oh, I'm not going to do birth control because I don't want to gain weight. But, look at how that would turn out. It's like, you've got to do what's best for you,
Right.
and it doesn't matter about weight. Anybody can be chubby or, plus size and beautiful, and, they can shine. It doesn't matter about the weight.
Right. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. And I think when I talk to people about the medication, I really do have like, whatever we do in life, it's a risk versus benefit conversation, and it's a potential for something to happen. It doesn't mean it will happen. It's a potential for something to happen. And if it does, can we, what, like you said, what can we do to further our overall wellness? Because being mentally well, to me, it's as priceless as having your physical health too. You know what I'm saying? And I respect the choices that people make. If they say I'd rather have this than this, doc, because it's a less chance of weight gain, even if it's not maybe the first kind of recommendation, I respect it. But to me, it's like how close can we get to that overall balance and that overall wellness? As safely as possible, because I always kind of come from that lens as well. The safety first lens. So, but yeah, I love how you put that. It's like, I want to be better, I want to be better. And what can we do to kind of further that? So, well, I want to just really thank you again. I think you have created just a really amazing project, and like I said, I watched it as soon as I was finished, I messaged you. And I think I mean, part of the reason that, and I kind of explained at the beginning why I appreciated it, but I think also being from Arkansas myself and, you know, seeing a person, another, a creative person, from that place, another Black woman, to me, I really want to amplify your voice. It's important to me to do that because I think people need to hear your story, and I think we need to hear when I say we, I mean as a profession of people who are in the mental health profession, we need to hear it from people who are receiving the care. I think it's important to hear that firsthand account from there. And I really do consider it, being a psychiatrist, to be a privilege, amongst medical professionals, because people share, and I know people talk to their doctors about all kind of intimate things, but I think particularly in mental health, people share some of the most intimate details of their life with us, the most traumatic things, some of their deepest, darkest secrets, and to hold that and to hold that space for people, I really do consider that a privilege, the position that I'm in and the ability that people trust me, with this, you know, woman, this little girl who grew up in Arkadelphia, Arkansas, and am in this position now that people like trust me and they trust me to be able to help them. I think that it is a privilege to be in that position. And I think it's a privilege like that you chose to share your story with the world. I think it was a privilege, in my opinion, that you did that and that I got to watch it. So thank you for doing that. And I really
You're
do.
welcome. You're welcome.
And so let people know again, and I have it tagged to this, but let people know where they can find you.
Well, I'm on Facebook, Olympia J Atkinson, and I'm mostly on Facebook.
That's your most active social media
social
profile.
media profile. Yes.
And again, I have your email, the link to the documentary. It will be included with this live. I'll also, after I edit out that little bit there, I'll post it to Instagram as well, which is my the largest social media presence that I have. Again, thank you to those who are tuned in live, and for anyone who will watch the replay. And thank you again for being on this live. I really appreciate it.